being heterodox, being against the grain, anti-woke, being the black guy who said the thing that black guys are not supposed to say. You can inhabit that persona to such an extent that your judgment is undermined by it.
The black guys of bloggingheads.tv, Glenn Loury and John McWhorter, have both been my intellectual heroes for a very long time. In fact, I owe the existence of this YouTube channel to Glenn Loury, as it was born when I was challenged to a debate by an African American who argued that Glenn Loury was a coon. I thought otherwise and accepted to defend Glenn against that charge. So, for a while, I mostly did commentary on or posted clips of Glenn and John's bi-monthly show. While I don't particularly fawn over them anymore because I frankly got tired of the race talk they had every 2 weeks, which seemed almost performative for an audience logging to hear two black guys complain about the dysfunction in the black community in America. I still hold them in high regard though, they're very smart men. But like any human being, they're not immune to motivated reasoning, audience capture, and rookie mistakes, and that is exactly what happened to Glenn Loury and John McWhorter recently. In one of their most successful episodes yet, which was entitled The Truth About George Floyd's Death, Glenn Loury and John McWhorter essentially endorsed the narrative of a documentary by Alpha News called The Fall of Minneapolis, which claimed that Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd and was wrongly convicted. John McWhorter in that episode proudly proclaimed we were lied to, supporting the conclusion of the documentary that Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd.
Unless that body cam footage is faked, Derek Chauvin didn't kill that man. I never thought I'd be saying that, but it appears to be true.
It turns out that documentary was a dog pile of propaganda that does not track with the facts of the matter. An investigative journalist, Radley Balco, investigated the claims made by Glenn and John's surrogate son, Coleman Hughes, in favor of that documentary, claims which, by the way, Glenn and John happened to share with Coleman. Balco's critique and expose of Coleman's piece has made Glenn Loury and John McWhorter to own up to the mistake by releasing a video entitled "We Were Wrong on This One." Glenn and John tried to do damage control on how easily they fell for the fall of Minneapolis propaganda. Well, it was more Glenn chastising them for being too hasty in believing the documentary, while John played the defense of it was not our fault that we got fooled.
Well, Glenn, we need to talk about this is very important, the George Floyd issue, because our statements about George Floyd have stirred a lot of people to watch a certain documentary. And now there's been a response to the documentary. And we need to, what's the word smart people use? We need to contextualize Radley Balco's journalistic sleuthing in response to the documentary.
John's framing is interesting. You need to recontextualize. No, you need to admit that you didn't do your due diligence as an intellectual before endorsing a narrative. There is nothing to recontextualize here.
What do you think?
Okay, let me try to set it up then. So the documentary is called The Fall of Minneapolis. J.C. Chase and Liz Collins, Minneapolis conservative journalist filmmaking crew. Let's tell the police side of the story of what went down in the killing of George Floyd, including the trial of Derek Chauvin.
The truth is, the police side of the story is irrelevant. In fact, any side of the story is irrelevant. What is relevant are the facts of the matter. This is a criminal case, not a dispute between a husband and his wife that needs to be resolved by hearing from both parties.
You and I invited the filmmakers onto the show after we had discussed the film ourselves in a separate episode. That episode went viral. It got over 1.5 million views, and it drove a lot of traffic to the site where the film was being projected at YouTube. We were involved in the discussion of the film and indeed put up posts with thumbnails like, "We were lied to," or words to that effect, John, because they were your words in that particular instance, that the narrative that came out of the killing of Floyd and the reality of what actually happened up there were not the same. Okay.
Not only did John declare we were lied to, but he also stated very boldly that he would eat crow if the documentary turned out to be wrong.
It doesn't mean that she's wrong, that she's pro-cop. The issue is whether she makes a case. And the case is painfully clear, and I'm willing to, I will eat crow if it turns out that she made all of this up. And folks, it's not about whether George Floyd was a good person. That's not my point. We were lied to. And the whole issue, the whole way we think about George Floyd was wrong, including the way I thought of him until about 10 minutes ago. I had no idea that Derek Chauvin didn't kill him.
I'm expecting him to make good on that bet he made before his audience.
Coleman Hughes also has picked up, the young Coleman Hughes podcaster, Coleman's Corner, Conversations with Coleman, took this up. and put up a big piece at Barry Weiss's newsletter in which he took up the question of whether or not Derek Chauvin was rightly convicted of murder of George Floyd, decided in the negative and made the case based on the film, largely, that that case was wrongly decided against Chauvin. And in reaction to Coleman, Radley Balco, now can I describe him properly? He's a veteran crime and policing reporter. You want to add to that, John?
I don't know that much about him, but he's an established name. He's a respected figure, by no means some sort of marginal partisan. And he has begun a very detailed response to Coleman's piece, and by extension, us. But he's taking Coleman's piece as the demonstration case for his purposes.
Coleman Hughes is just a sad case of a very bright kid who's been told is the smartest all his life and has become complacent in thinking, trying to use common sense to analyze complex issues that are way beyond his capacity. I don't blame him. He's young, he found fame and relevance at such a young age, but he must grow intellectually if he's to fill the shoes he's been given. But at the moment, it's an oversized shoe and it shows.
He is very hard on Coleman. He's got a snide, kind of dismissive tone. Coleman Hughes says he does his own research. Well, if he had done his own research, he would know the following.
And Balco is very correct in that characterization of Coleman. Coleman wouldn't know proper research if he smacked him in the nuts. A very clear example is his amateurish commentary on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
What I mainly got out of it is the filmmakers were dishonest in their depiction of the situation because they left the testimony of the police personnel who were mainly trying to say Chauvin was off the reservation. His behavior was not consistent with the appropriate procedure. It made it look as if they were saying something different from what they, in the fullness of their full testimony, was saying. And what I took from that was was two things. Discrediting the filmmakers, but also indirectly discrediting people who took the filmmakers at face value, like me and you, and Coleman Hughes.
What part of the fact that the makers of the documentary, being conservative, did not make Glenn and John to be more wary to the possibility that the documentary makers would be biased and try to push a certain narrative? Apparently, if Glenn and John had done a better job questioning the makers of the documentary, they wouldn't be making this almost embarrassing damage control video. Now, if you're looking for something fun and exciting to read, check out my crime fiction novel, which features a debate on race and colonialism. Grab a copy and enjoy the read. The link is in the description of the video.
Glenn, I think on this that I think we were within our rights to call attention to the documentary. I think that it's one thing to look at all of this blow by blow. It's another thing to look at what a conversation is supposed to be. And national conversations are sometimes messy. For that documentary to be out there and for good thinking, bien pensant people to simply ignore it because it was made by conservatives would not be the way conversations go. Somebody needed to call attention to it. And frankly, we were some of the only people who would do it and be able to make big enough a noise to get other people to look.
Now, the problem, John, is not that you called attention to the documentary. The problem is that you bought into the BS narrative of the documentary and helped propagate it. I have a question for John. If John knew the film was BS and the filmmakers were trying to mislead people, would he still have propagated it? How certain is he that those who chose to ignore the film did not know that it was BS? Now, it's very possible that they avoided the film because the makers were conservative, but it's also possible that they knew that the film was BS and couldn't be bothered to waste their time with it.
I don't think the question is should the film have been acknowledged and recognized. I think the question is how it's interpreted. And I think the question for us is, were we too credulous? Not that we should not have ignored it, but that we should have been more skeptical about it, particularly about its technical claims. Which challenge the limits of our own expertise in terms of being able to evaluate them. So we're trusting filmmakers to a certain degree when we do that.
I think Glenn has the right attitude here. We were wrong. We jumped too fast. We didn't do our due diligence.
I've been asking myself the question, how could I have been so, I almost want to say gullible? How could I have been so credulous? How could I have not had my guard up? And I think the answer is, well, I wanted a counter narrative to the dominant narrative about what happened to George Floyd and the subsequent developments of the summer of 2020. I didn't like that police station being allowed to be burned to the ground. when the opportunity to question the narrative came along, I jumped at it, and perhaps incautiously so. That's what I want to say.
Glenn goes through more self-reflection in which he inadvertently revealed the most damning thing about this whole fiasco. The idea that Glenn was simply looking for a counter-narrative, not for truth, is the most damning thing about what he just said. How can he not realize how easy it is to get duped by false counter-narratives? Even if the dominant narrative is false, it doesn't make just about any narrative correct. It's possible to believe that the protests and the destruction that followed the death of George Floyd were condemnable and also believe that killing of George Floyd was unwarranted. It's possible to believe that the burning of a police station is a bad thing, while also believing that the police sometimes use overhanded tactics. It's possible to believe that George Floyd was a criminal whose criminal actions led to the police interactions that ultimately killed him, while also believing that he had the right to a fair trial and not to be killed publicly the way he was killed. It's possible to believe all these things because multiple things can be true at the same time. But it seems Glenn and John were so eager to pick a side and agree with that side. And this is what you get. You get hoodwinked into believing and propagating BS. I like that Glenn and John tried to get ahead of this by admitting they were too hasty. But I fear that they are being too hasty in accepting Balco's expose as being correct as well. Balco has only released one part of a three-part expose before Glenn and John caved in to say we were wrong. Did they take the time this time to properly vet the claims being made by Balco, or are they just going off what seems correct like they did the last time with the fall of Minneapolis? So that's the video. If you like what we do on this channel, consider becoming a channel member or patron. However, your likes, shares, and views are just as valued.